Koe ki te reo irarangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere aki nei. This evening, parts of the west coast are taking an absolute thrashing with yet another weather washout. Nelson's declared a state of emergency and Westport's about to get the worst of it. We'll cross live to our reporters. You're still hired. All Blacks coach Ian Foster is confirmed in the job following a unanimous board decision and a pretty awkward press conference. The gas station owner that wants to pump up punishments for ram raiders. And the Minister in charge of workplace safety responds to claims that some seasonal workers are basically being treated like slaves. And a rough old-fashioned rule or not, should Dunedin's CBD dog ban be lifted?
RNZ News at 5. Ahi Marie, good afternoon, I'm Evie Ashton. A state of emergency has been declared in Nelson, where the Maitai River breached its banks this afternoon. People in about 70 homes near the river have been told to evacuate. Chris Choate of Nelson Tasman Civil Defence says the police and fire and emergency have been going door to door, alerting residents to the danger.
This is the most urgent one that we have at the moment. We have a number of roads closed and surface flooding in, Golden Bay, for example, and Rocks Road is closed at the moment just due to some issues along there. But it's generally been surface flooding and our rivers have been holding. But this area is definitely the one of most urgent need.
A woman told to leave her house in Nile Street says the road now looks like a river. She says she's lived in the city all her life and never seen the river so high. A Devonish Place resident, Rob Hunter, says the street was quickly transformed into a river when a slip apparently blocked a culvert. He says the water didn't threaten homes, but diggers have been trying to divert the torrent.
Yeah, a few people have found their way home, not in vehicles, of course, it's just like a riverbed now, but they've managed to walk their way up on the high ground and make it home, but it's certainly a bit dicey trying to cross the street. I don't think many people have managed to do that.
Meanwhile, Nelson has been upgraded to the highest possible weather warning, joining Bulla and Westland at red, the level reserved for the most extreme storms. Met Service meteorologist Ashley Parks says that nearly 70 millimetres of rain has fallen in the city since midday, but the heaviest fall has been in the Tasman Ranges, which has poured down valleys, causing rivers to rise in the city. Niwa says Takaka in Golden Bay got more than a month's worth of rain in 15 hours today, and there's much more to come. New Zealand Rugby has made up its mind. All Blacks coach Ian Foster will keep his job through to the World Cup next year. Despite a rolling maul of criticism in recent months, the board says it still has faith in Foster and unanimously voted to retain him. Foster says he understands the job comes with a high level of public scrutiny.
So I remind people it's a privilege to be in this job, and it's never something you take for granted. It's never something that you plan on long term, I don't think, because I know it's always about performance and stuff, so there's no doubt it's been a tough time.
Foster's next assignment will be Argentina and Christchurch in 10 days' time. Health leaders say the COVID wave looks to be well on the way out, but there's no guarantee of a low COVID summer. Reported daily case numbers have been dropping steadily for a month, and the 7-day rolling average is down by 20% since last week. Health correspondent Rowan Quinn reports.
Weekly hospitalisation rates have also dropped for the second week in a row. Te Whatu Ora Health New Zealand says hospitals are still under pressure from winter illnesses and surgeries still being put off. But it says most hospitals are now able to do more than they could a few weeks ago, with no delays to the most urgent operations. It says Northern Hemisphere countries have shown a third COVID wave is possible this summer.
And as expected, the official cash rate has been raised for the 7th time in a row and is now higher than it's been at any time for 7 years. The Reserve Bank today raised the rate by 50 basis points, taking it to 3%, and Governor Adrian Orr says that won't be the last increase.
Monetary conditions need to continue to tighten until they are confident that there is sufficient restraint on spending to bring inflation back to within the 1 to 3% target range. The committee remains absolutely resolute about achieving our monetary policy remit.
Adrian Orr expects inflation to fall back within its 1 to 3% target range by the middle of 2024. In sport, New Zealand Rugby CEO Mark Robinson says there's excitement at the rise of Joe Schmidt within the All Blacks coaching team. While Ian Foster is continuing on as coach, former Ireland coach Schmidt is being rewarded with an expanded role, primarily helping with attack. Robinson says both Foster and the players are right behind Schmidt's elevation.
He is a world-class coach who has had unbelievable success in every environment he's been in. Humble man, him and Foz connect incredibly well, have deep respect for each other.
Phoenix men's coach Ufuk Talay is expecting good things in tonight's Australia Cup round of 16 clash with Melbourne City. The Wellington side have been based in Sydney for the last couple of weeks, and Talay says City are in a similar position to them in this part of the pre-season.
They're a ball-playing team. They've got some good players up top. Obviously, we always have to travel to play these cup games. They haven't changed what they've done from last season, just a couple of personnel changes. But other than that, it's still going to be a difficult task, and I'm sure our boys will be up for the challenge.
And 23-time Grand Slam champion Serena Williams has fallen to 0 from 2 in matches since announcing her imminent retirement. The 40-year-old, who has indicated she'll retire after the US Open, has been beaten in straight sets by Britain's Emma Raducanu at the Cincinnati Open. That's the news.
Wet weather.
Mother Nature's not being very kind to us at the moment, I have to say, but we're here for our communities.
Emergency supplies are stockpiled.
There are 2 big pump tanks that are sitting ready to go. Lots of piping. There's piles of sand and sandbags as well.
More to come.
There's a surge of wind and moisture, this fire hose of moisture originating from the tropics.
Your shelter in a storm. Morning reports weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
You're on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday, and there's plenty of rain. Severe weather warnings and watches are in place for a prolonged period of heavy rain and strong winds affecting northern and western parts of the country. A red heavy rain warning is in force for Bulla and Westland. From Northland to Taranaki, also Coromandel Bay of Plenty and Taupo, periods of rain with some heavy falls, severe gale northeasterlies in exposed parts of Northland. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Waded Upper, also Whanganui and Taihape, cloudy with patchy rain. From Manawatu to Wellington, periods of rain. Marlborough, Nelson, Bulla and Westland, rain with heavy falls, easing late tomorrow. Significant heavy rain about Bulla and Westland, and as we heard in the news, there's now a red heavy rain warning for Nelson as well. Canterbury and Otago, mostly cloudy, periods of rain clearing tomorrow evening. Southland and Fiordland, partly cloudy today, rain tomorrow, easing to a few showers in the evening. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, rain developing tomorrow afternoon. The time is 7 minutes past 5. I'll have the latest news headlines and any traffic news at 20 past 5.
Nā mihi iwi, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Tonight, New Zealand Rugby has backed Ian Foster to remain the All Blacks coach through to the World Cup next year, with a storming victory at Ellis Park in South Africa seemingly saving Foster's job.
Ian has provided management with his own recommendations, and these have in turn been recommended to the board, who have unanimously agreed they have absolute confidence that Ian and this coaching group are the right people to lead the All Blacks through to the World Cup.
And we'll have more on that in a moment, but first, parts of the West Coast are getting a thrashing. A red warning is in place in Westport. Emergency workers and volunteers are going door to door to get people out. And the Bulla River is expected to peak tomorrow. Neva Chittick reports.
Fiona Campbell only moved back into her house on Friday. Her family have been out since the floodwaters went through in July last year.
It's all freshly done from the first lot of floods, so we're pretty scared and terrified of it happening again.
Repeated warnings and the threat of flooding is wearing her out.
It's horrible. It's been a horrible year with the kids and the animals all being split up and that, waiting for us to have a home again. Yeah, and not much confidence that the council have done enough, to be honest.
Emergency personnel and the Defence Force have been door-knocking 140 at-risk properties in and around Westport today. Bulla Emergency Management Controller Al Lawn says they're encouraging occupants to leave before they're ordered to.
That's primarily due to the information that we've got from our flood controllers that some of those areas could be at risk in the early hours tomorrow morning. We would rather take the precautionary approach and ask people to self-evacuate today in daylight hours as opposed to knock on doors at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning.
Buller Taxis is offering to help those affected. Driver Beverly says it's nice to be able to give back to their clients, especially as most are older and live alone.
We're providing in transportation for anyone who's need an evacuation, and it's for free. That's part of the company's Buller Taxis community service.
But Barbara and her partner were planning to hunker down and trust in their sandbags, which saved their garage in the February floods.
We were flooded last year in July, went through our garage about 18 inches, and we decided we'd sandbag, keep it safe again. It didn't get into our house, but hopefully this time we're feeling positive.
Laurie Smith says the community was over the seemingly constant flooding in states of emergency, but the town's brilliant neighbourly spirit makes it bearable.
We've done our places and old friends, now the guy around in Gladstone Street, so we've done our 4 places. Now we're onto the other neighbours as well now. We're just going around, if they need it. We know the ones where they flooded and that, so we just go and get the bags and we just take them to them.
The rain is forecast to get heavier tonight, with the Buller River expected to peak tomorrow morning.
And Neva Chittick joins us now from Westport. Kia ora, Neva. How are things looking there right now?
Kia ora, Lisa. The heaviest of the rain has just set in probably the last half an hour or so. At the moment, the ground is pretty sodden already. There are people here getting sandbags, filling them up. There are piles of sandbags everywhere. You can hear pretty much just water and the wind hurtling through the town. The waves are also crashing out on the beach when you start getting close to the coast. It's all go here. People are lining up at the supermarket, getting their supplies. There's even a bit of a queue for the petrol station earlier in the day too.
And Neva, where are the areas of a concern?
So based on flood modelling, 140 homes had a visit today by either the police or the Defence Force, just letting them know that it would be best to leave now if they can or if they want to, because they don't want to have to evacuate people tonight, because that is when the Buller River is expected to peak, is early in the morning. So if anything does happen, it will kick off this evening. Those areas that are affected are Snodgrass, which is just on the outskirts of Westport. There are a few central roads in Westport as well, and the communities of Seddonville and Makahinui further up the coast have had army trucks today visit them, bringing them some extra supplies. At this stage, it's not yet known exactly what the extent of the flooding or the damage or road closures will be, but they are warning that the Orowaiti River on the other side of town could be the problem. They're saying the lagoon area may fill up even higher than it did in the February flood this year, but at this point in time, the Buller River is doing okay. They're not too concerned about it, think it will stay in its banks.
And Neva, those people who are sandbagging there, just moving off for the evening, I think, as the light fades. But you would have been talking to a few people today. So how is the community feeling tonight?
I think there's a mixture of feelings here. Number one, people are very much tired of this. They're over going into, panic stations every time there is heavy rain. Of course, they are taking it all within their stride, though. It's quite amazing when you come and you see everyone around this big pile of sand, throwing it into the bags. They're all greeting each other, saying, "Oh, nice day to be outside," and the people are filling up bags for their neighbours. It's really a community feel, and I think that's what's getting people through this. Though there will definitely be some people on tender hooks tonight. One of those that we spoke to earlier was sandbagging up their garage. They'd had water come through once before. Another time the sandbag save it. They just don't know what will happen this time. They were planning on playing some cards, hunkering down with the TV, and it seems like everyone's been checking in on each other, making sure they're all right. So while the mood is tense, people are looking out for each other. I guess that's the most important thing with a long night ahead.
Thanks for the update, Neva. That's Neva Chittick joining us live from Westport there, surrounded by, quite a few sandbags. It is 13 minutes past 5. Kia amo tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Now, if you are in the area, would love to know how you're getting on. Do text us 2101. I'm delighted to be here. The words of All Blacks coach Ian Foster after his bosses backed him to stay in the job through to the next World Cup. Foster had come under scrutiny after the All Blacks suffered 5 defeats in their last 7 games, with New Zealand Rugby refusing to publicly back him. But the All Blacks silenced the doubters with a massive win against the Springboks at Ellis Park on the weekend. And today, the board unanimously decided to keep him. Our sports reporter Clay Wilson joins me now in the studio. Well, Clay. Slightly awkward press conference. What do we make of all of this?
That's one way to describe it, yeah. I mean, we walked in there today and based on all the reporting, what we've seen and heard in recent weeks, both options seemed very much on the table. But we walked in, there were 2 chairs. We knew Mark Robinson was going to be in one of them. We knew board chair Stuart Robinson was going to be in one of them. And the third chair, I guess, gave us the hint that perhaps Ian Foster was going to stay. And of course, that is the case. There has been so much speculation that that win at the weekend might not have been enough to save him. Some reports even that the board had basically made the decision, were ready to pull the trigger. But that was pretty much refuted by Robinson and Mitchell today. They said it was always their plan to review after 5 matches into this season. That's what Ian Foster had asked for at the end of last season when they did one of these other reviews. That the board, the executive, the players, Mark Robinson said the board, the executive, the players unanimously were behind the call to keep Foster on board. Mark Robinson said that win at the weekend, he said, was powerful, but they've seen the development coming. And of course for Ian Foster, he said they're delighted off the top. It's been a very intense few weeks for him, but he did seem relaxed. It really seemed like he'd had a weight lifted off his shoulders, and you can't blame him. He's been through the ringer. And here's what he had to say about how it felt to retain his job.
It's a privilege to be in this job, and it's never something you take for granted. It's never something that you plan on long term, I don't think, because I know it's always about performance and stuff. So, there's no doubt it's been a tough time, but it's I think hopefully you've seen in myself and the team the last couple of weeks is that we also know you just got to be in the here and now, and our goal is to work on performance and improvement. So I want to be a key catalyst of that. So I'm delighted to be here because I believe in the plan I got. I believe we've got great support behind us, and now we just want to set our sails and get stuck into work.
So Ian Foster there confirmed in the job. Did that performance on the weekend really save his position?
Well, of course, this was a big topic at the press conference this afternoon, and both Mark Robinson and Stuart Mitchell somewhat downplayed that side of it. But you have to think it played a significant role in terms of Foster keeping his job. If they'd have lost that game at the weekend, they would have been 1 from the last 7 games. So you'd have to think it softened the stance of those fans and also perhaps some board members, some people in key positions that were thinking it was time for him to go. And New Zealand Rugby must have been prepping, we don't know this, but they must have been prepping for both eventualities here, that if there was a significant result, something, there may not be a change, but that also that there was a chance that that might not happen and that they may have to move on. So I guess the performances in some sense has just reinforced some of those things that Mark Robinson says they've seen in recent weeks while they've been around the team, that Ian Foster has told them about, the players have told them about, and that's been enough for them to decide to keep Ian Foster in the job.
Interesting, they conceded that they hadn't handled everything as well as they possibly could have at that press conference.
Yes.
Yeah. Hey, so the big question then is, where does this leave the Scott Robertson fan club?
Well, yeah, of course, there's still going to be a lot of fans who don't agree with this decision. Many have been in the Scott Robertson fan club for a long time, and they're not going to all of a sudden jump out. And despite last weekend, this is still a team that's won 2 of their last 7 matches, a team that historically wins at around 80% and is not winning like that. A 65% win record under Ian Foster, which coming from Steve Hansen, who was up around 85 or higher, it's still been a dramatic drop. And I did note, coming back from the press conference in the taxi, the talk back, the first couple of callers didn't agree. We're very much keen on seeing that there was a change. Of course, that hasn't happened. I did ask Mark Robinson about these fans and what his message was to them, the ones that didn't agree with this decision.
Oh, look, we understand the passion in this country for the sport. We've seen it spill out in a whole lot of forms in recent weeks, haven't we? Which, while challenging, is something I guess we have to acknowledge means there's a huge amount of interest in the game here. So, which we respect. But hopefully people, respect that we are constantly making decisions for the sport, be they in regard to the community game, be they involved with bringing on an investor such as Silver Lake. There are always things that are contentious in our game around what we're doing, and obviously around the All Blacks there's no greater visibility around our game than the All Blacks, so any decision that is made there attracts that same level of passion and scrutiny as well. But I think what we'd say is we have taken a really good hard look at the situation. We've listened to a number of different views very close to what is happening within the environment, and ultimately we've made the best decision and the right decision for the team going forward.
Okay, so the players, a number of players, high-profile ones, came out in support of Ian Foster. How much did that play a part in him keeping the job?
This has been a very notable part of this whole saga. Even since post the Ireland series and that series loss, senior players supporting Ian Foster. And as the scrutiny is mounted and the pressure is mounted on Ian Foster, it really appears like the senior player support of Ian Foster has gone along with that. It was notable post the win at the weekend as well that some of that was not in press conferences or when players were asked, going out on their own social media pages, really going off their own bat to show their support for Ian Foster, almost in some ways a message to New Zealand rugby that this is our man and we want him to stay in the job. So Mark Robinson did acknowledge that they'd sought the feedback of the players and that the players' opinions had played a role, but of course he downplayed that was just one part of the process. But as we mentioned with the result, you have to think that both that result and the opinions, the views of these senior players played a significant role in Ian Foster being able to keep his job.
Thanks, Clay. Clay Wilson there with Ian Foster keeping his job. You'll have heaps of reckons on that. 2101 on the text. It is 5:20 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And coming up, the Dunedin ban that's a bit of a downer for dog owners. Homai o whakaaro. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program, whether it's about Ian Foster, the All Blacks coach, or if you're in one of those wet areas on the West Coast. Let us know how you're going. 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or there's always email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to go to the headlines. Ko Evie Arno tēnei.
Kia ora, Lisa. A state of emergency has been declared in Nelson, where the Maitai River breached its banks this afternoon. Nelson has also been upgraded to the highest possible weather warning, joining Buller and Westland at red, the level reserved for the most extreme storms. Meanwhile, Westport locals are chipping in to help manage a severe downfall which is set to continue until Thursday. 140 households in Buller have been asked to voluntarily evacuate due to a flood risk, and Buller Taxis has been offering free rides to those evacuating in the region, with much of its clientele being older people who live alone. All Blacks coach Ian Foster says it's been a difficult period, but believes he's the man to lead the All Blacks to a fourth World Cup title. Following weeks of speculation, New Zealand Rugby confirmed today that Foster will retain his role despite a string of recent losses. ASB's chief economist says household spending will be further squeezed after the Reserve Bank hiked interest rates once again. The RBNZ lifted the official cash rate by 50 basis points, taking it to 3% as it presses on with its aggressive action on decades high inflation. And health leaders say the COVID wave looks to be well on the way out, but there's no guarantee of a low COVID summer. Daily case numbers have been dropping steadily for a month, and the 7-day rolling average is down by 20% since last week. Those are the headlines. Looking at traffic in Wellington, congestion due to a crash just after the northbound Johnsonville on-ramp should have eased by now. At the top of the South Island, State Highway 6 is closed between Hida and Havelock because of flooding, and obviously those red rain warnings will be affecting traffic movement in Nelson, Buller and Westland. I'll update you with the latest headlines and traffic at about 5:40.
Kia ora rā e ho. Returning to the wild weather at the top of the South Island, Takaka in Golden Bay has had more than a month's worth of rain in 15 hours today. Heavy rains causing rivers to overflow, sparking evacuations too. Our reporter Kirsty Frame is at Paynes Ford on the Takaka River, which has breached its banks. Now tell us, Kirsty, when did the flooding happen and how bad is it?
Hi Lisa, as you can see I am gumboots deep in water right now, and that's because the Takaka River behind me burst its bank sometime earlier today, and that was just from the rainfall that has, as you said, happened just in the last 15 hours. Down 50 metres back from me is where the river usually stands, and on the other side of the river the water has breached well and truly over, taking up over 2 paddocks. I think I measured it roughly about 400 metres, and it's edging on a residential property which I understand have left themselves.
And a number of homes in Nelson have been evacuated. Can we expect more of that?
Yeah, so far we're at 70, and that was after the Matai River burst at about 3 p.m. today. The council is saying that Teal Valley, which is north of Nelson, may need to evacuate later today as those conditions, as we can see here, the rain is coming in a little bit harder, and I believe in Nelson as well, so more evacuations could be likely tonight. And the Tasman District Council has said that if anyone is feeling anxious or nervous about the water around them, to find a place to stay tonight if they need to, and there is a welfare station at Saxton Stadium in Nelson.
Yeah, so what are the roads looking like then if people do need to get on the move?
So Takaka is completely cut off anywhere north from the little town here. So far the Takaka Hill is still open, and that connects you to Nelson, and the eastern sides of Nelson where that flooding has hit, there are a number of roads there that have been closed, some small, some larger, and we are expecting, I think, with this weather set to worsen, that more roads could be closing, especially those that are nearby the river.
Kirsty, you look like you're in a lake rather than a ford.
Yep, you would not believe that this is a car park usually, and definitely the water has risen since I've been standing here, so very keen to get out of the puddle that we're in now.
Exactly, get to higher ground, Kirsty. Thank you for the update. That is Kirsty Frame, who's at Paynes Ford on the Takaka River, and if you're listening, not watching, it does look more like a small lake rising up her gumboots as we spoke to her there. A Bay of Plenty service station owner who's been targeted multiple times by ram raiders and burglars says she feels the region is being ignored by the government, with efforts to deter criminals confined to Auckland. Kieran Mahoney and Glenn Rickard, who own the only gas station in Rotorua, were among 36 or so locals who met with police and political leaders yesterday to demand action on the crime wave. They've been ram raided twice and burgled twice since March 2021 last year. Our reporter Leonard Powell visited them to find out what impact this has had.
The isolated Lake Rotorua gas station on State Highway 30 has at times been left completely unable to operate. And as it's the only petrol station in the area, this has had a huge impact on the whole community. What upsets Kieran Mahoney most is that the perpetrators appear to be getting let off the hook.
So when the first ram raid happened, they took the till, which operates the petrol pumps. So the petrol pumps couldn't work, and that was 10 days without fuel for this community, which was really, really hard on the community. And there's no consequences for these guys.
In May, the government announced that $6 million from its Proceeds of Crime fund would be invested in solutions like bollards in front of at-risk shops. But this has been of little help to Bay of Plenty business owners.
We realised that the Bay of Plenty is one of the highest areas for ram raids lately, and why have they rolled out a pilot program in Auckland for giving the shopkeepers bollards and money and smoke detectors? Surely they should have rolled it out here. We're obviously not as important as Auckland is, and they're rolling out a pilot program up there. So that really pisses me off. That here's the poor guys in the countryside, we're trying to make a living here, and everybody else is too. And these little bastards get away with it time and time and time again, and nothing happens.
Break-ins and ram raids have cost the business $30,000 in repairs, including the toughened glass doors, which cost $2,000 each to fix. And its insurance premiums have soared from $6,100 to $10,500 in a year. While Oranga Tamariki has paid the couple $160 each to attend 7 separate family group conferences with the offenders who have been caught, they say they are yet to receive a cent in reparation. Kieran's husband, Glenn Rickard, says while the police are doing their best, he feels they may have no choice next time.
There's nothing stopping us from putting something in there to actually trap them if they do break in, and that's the way it's getting. We'll have to take it into our own hands. And it's nothing against the police. They do an absolutely brilliant job.
They do.
They have been good with us. They've kept in contact. They've caught every single person, as I say. But their hands are tied. So the average Joe citizen is just going to take it into their own hands. Everyone we've spoken to that's been in the same position feels the same way.
The couple believe the country's laws allow young offenders to feel invincible.
The last break-in, it's all on the video camera. The police have seen it. They're making a TikTok video, jumping over counters and just being idiots. And yet to them, they're real heroes.
They're just breaking in to do damage because they know they can get away with it. There's no repercussions on them. You know, there's got to be some consequences. Otherwise, we're just breeding them for the big person's jail, really, the big house. And they know that they're not going to go to the big house until they're 18. And at 18, it all gets wiped.
At yesterday's meeting, it was suggested that most crimes were being carried out by people from out of town, including people being moved into emergency housing in Rotorua. Kieran disagrees.
What the constable or the commissioner said yesterday at the meeting about them all being from out of town, that is rubbish. They've all been from Kararau, Te Tiko, Murupara, Whakatane, Taupo and Rotorua. So that's all our ones. They're not coming in from out of town and doing it.
Yesterday's meeting was attended by Labour MP Tamati Coffey, as well as Rotorua Area Commander Inspector Philip Taikato. But for Kieran, there's too much talk and not enough action.
What they said is, we'll get back together in 6 weeks and we'll have some answers. It's like, get back together in 2 weeks. You know, there's like half a dozen questions. What's going to take so long? And I asked Tamati if the people in this room that have bothered to come to this meeting, if the government can stump up and pay us for our bollards and things as what they're doing in Auckland.
And that was gas station owner Kieran Mahoney ending that report from Leonard Powell. Police won't comment on whether the crime prevention program could include security funding for Rotorua businesses. In a statement, they say 5 Auckland retailers have received support so far and they're working towards a trial of 15 to 20 more businesses. Let us know what you think about that story. You can text us on 2101 or you can email us at checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. And some of you have got in touch about Ian Foster keeping his job. Gary says, thanks to the 8 Crusaders in the last 10 minutes of the game, Foster's job was saved. And this one in says, nothing like fighting back from adversity to get you motivated. I'm happy for Ian Foster. Give him another chance. Let us know your thoughts. Text us 2101 or tweet us at checkpointrnz. Is it time for Dunedin dogs to have their day on the CBD streets, that is? Some canine lovers and business owners want to ditch a bylaw banning dogs from a number of central locations, including the Octagon, the Civic Centre and the Library Plaza. Some say they have to dodge certain parts of town and the rules are outdated. So we dialed up Woof Bar co-owner Josh Thomas and his buddy to see what they reckon.
Kia ora, Lisa. I'm Josh Thomas, owner of Woof Bar in Dunedin, and this is Rupert.
And Rupert is?
Rupert is a 9-year-old Jack Russell Fox Terrier.
And we appreciate Rupert appearing on Checkpoint's highlight of the day so far, Josh. Sure. Tell me, what is the problem with the current rules around dogs in the CBD in Dunedin?
Well, I think anyone who's like me knows that dogs bring a lot of joy to a lot of people, and it seems crazy in a modern civilized modern city that dogs are not able to wander around the main street. I know when I'm in a great city, dogs are everywhere, and I can't see why there's any problem with it.
So at the moment, with the ban on certain areas, for example, the Octagon, what do you have to do? Do you have to smuggle Rupert through the city confines?
Actually, I proudly walk him through the Octagon on a regular basis. I don't know that anyone is particularly enforcing the bylaw. I think most people in council are fairly sensible, pragmatic people, and I've talked to the mayor about it. We have a great mayor, and he's pretty down with changing this as well. So I think most people really don't care that much. There's bigger fish to fry in this world than beautiful dogs wandering through the Octagon.
Why do you think that the rule exists at the moment? Have you got to the bottom of it? I mean, what were they trying to solve with it?
Yeah, I haven't got to the bottom of it, and it's been on my to-do list for a while, but I haven't been able to. I really wanted to track down what the theory was for when they introduced it. But I haven't had time to do it, and I would really like to know, because I can't see any logic. Maybe there was a time when dogs were worse behaved and people were more useless at picking up, dog poo, but I think times have changed. You don't stand in dog poo that much these days. People are pretty good at picking it up. And to be honest, compared to the way humans behave in the Octagon after midnight on a weekend night, dogs are the least of our worries.
You reckon Rupert is better behaved than some of the human people?
Oh, yes, very much so.
Hey, the thing is, and all cards on the table, I love a dog, right? But not everyone does. Some people are scared of them, they're nervous, they just don't like them. You raise the issue of poo. What about them and having to share the space with dogs?
Well, I think most dog owners are very responsible, and it's a little bit like a dog in any public place. And, let's face it, dogs are allowed on a leash pretty much everywhere. And most dog owners are very responsible and, keep them on a leash, keep them away from people. I always assume someone may not be dog friendly, and am a little bit cautious about letting Rupert go too close, because some people, do have a fear of dogs. It's a bit different here in Wolf Bar because we are known for dogs being in here, as are a few local bars. So dogs do roam around. But again, I think you've just got to keep an eye on them and keep your distance from people until they show an interest in saying hello.
So what would your message be to the council then around this particular rule?
Dogs bring utter joy to most people, and they have a place in our centre city.
Tell us a bit about Rupert.
Well, Rupert is the cutest in all the land. He is just a supreme babe, and a woof regular, and he's just the absolute love of my life.
And you would like to be able to walk him through town and still be abiding by the rules?
I would, ultimately.
I wonder what he thinks of this. He's looking intensely there. Are you expecting to hear anything official back from the council? You said you had a chat to the mayor.
Yeah, I haven't started any kind of formal process. It's just been chats at the moment. But it's great that there's a little bit of, media around it, because I think it's just a hangover from days gone by. And I would hope it would be quite tidy just to, chuck it out and move on.
And that was Rupert and his faithful friend Josh Thomas, the co-owner of Wolf Bar, talking to us from Dunedin. Let us know what you think about that. You can text in on 2101 or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. It is 28 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It is time for the business news. Ko taku hoa inaine called Giles Beckford, and he's joining us live from our Wellington studio. One big story today, Giles. The Reserve Bank has hiked rates again.
Kia ora to you, Lisa. Yes, it was on the cards. The Reserve Bank was universally expected to raise the cash rate by 50 basis points to 3%. That's the highest since mid-2015. We've had 7 rate rises now in a row, starting from last October when it was 0.25%. And there's more to come. Reserve Bank making it quite clear in its forecast today and in its rhetoric and in its news conference that there will be probably another 100 basis points, another increase from 3 to 4%, probably by the end of the year. There are 2 more rate decisions to come, one in October, one in November. People think that there'll be 2 lots of 50 basis points, and then the RBNZ will sit pat. There are some people with the view that perhaps the bank will go 50 in October, 25 basis points in November, and perhaps another 25 in February as it starts to look at the numbers. But it's all based on the message that we've been hearing consistently for the past 9 months, which is inflation is too high. We are here to tackle it. We are here to bring it under control. Now, they're forecasting only a gradual decline in inflation. Indeed, it won't get back into the famous 1 to 3% target zone much before 2024. And so from that point of view, as somebody whispered to me after the news conference today, this is a bit like the management approach that the beatings will continue until morale improves. In this case, the RBNZ says we will still keep hammering away at inflation. In other words, we need to keep the economy slowing down. The big worry, of course, is wages, which have gathered a real head of steam in the past 3 to 6 months in particular. And that is now one of the main impulses, the drivers of domestic inflation, far more than whatever is happening with the Ukraine war and the supply chain disruptions and the like. The key issue now is domestic inflation, and that's what the cash rate rises are all aimed at. Interestingly, the Reserve Bank says house prices, which they've been predicting will fall perhaps as much as 20% from the peak, which was, I think, November last year, through to the trough, which will probably be sometime next year. They're suggesting that house prices now are far more sustainable, so they're happy on that particular one. It's the tight labour market that's the particular worry. They say households, although they're feeling the squeeze of higher rates, they will in fact, they're in good enough shape now to be able to withstand those. And what gives them confidence is they're saying, look, interest rates, although they're rising, they've been built in. The cash rate rises have been built in by banks already. They've been stress testing people who borrow from them at around 6 to 6.5%. In fact, I've heard one bank is over 7% as it assesses whether you've got the ability to pay higher rates. And so from that point of view, the feeling is that perhaps the banks won't need to be pushing or passing on quite the amount of increases in the OCR that they have in the past, because mortgage rates are at the level where they're roughly expected to be. They may well, in fact, nip up a bit. The other factor, of course, in house rates, in mortgage rates, is that with fewer people borrowing, the banks start to cast an eye about keeping market share. So they're going to be a little less gung-ho in wanting to raise interest rates. So it's a modestly confident Reserve Bank that says, we still got to do the work, but we're getting there.
And Giles, how were the markets looking then?
Top 50 index, it hummed and hard through the day. It ended up just 6 points high, 11,853. Should note that people did like the Fletcher Building result, which was a solid lift in profit and a solid forecast of further growth. For the currency, a bit of a lift for the Kiwi after that Reserve Bank statement, so 63.6 US cents and 90.6 Australian.
Thank you, Giles. Ka kite, Giles Beckford joining us live there from Wellington. It is 19 minutes to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. And don't forget to get in touch about anything you've heard on the program, homai or whakaaro. Let us know your thoughts on dogs and Dunedins, what should happen to ram raiders in the regions. And also Ian Foster keeps his job as the All Blacks coach. Let us know your thoughts. 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time to go to the headlines. Anea iwi mina pitipiti kōrero.
Tēnā koe, Lisa. Nelson has been upgraded to the highest possible weather warning, joining Buller and Westland at red, reserved for the most extreme storms. Niwa says Takaka in Golden Bay had more than a month's worth of rain in 15 hours today. Meanwhile, a Nelson woman who's been told to leave her house on Nile Street says the road now looks like a river because the Maitai has breached its banks. She says she's lived in the city all her life and never seen the river so high. New Zealand Rugby has made up its mind. All Blacks coach Ian Foster will keep his job through to the World Cup next year. Despite a wave of criticism in recent months, the board says it still has faith in Foster and unanimously voted to retain him. A Bay of Plenty service station owner who's been targeted multiple times by ram raiders and burglars says she feels the region is being ignored by the government with new efforts to deter criminals confined to Auckland. Kieran Marnie, who was among several locals who met with police and political leaders yesterday to demand action on the crime wave, says they don't feel at all supported. And the search continues for the missing kayaker Gregory Flavel on Lake Rotorua. Lake Rotorua, that is. The 18-year-old failed to return from his kayak last Wednesday, prompting a search involving police, land search and rescue teams, the Navy and Coast Guard. Coast Guard has been out searching on the lake today and is expected to continue tomorrow. Those are the headlines. Looking to traffic at the top of the South Island, State Highway 6 is closed between Hedda and Havelock because of flooding. And obviously, if you're in Nelson, Buller and Westland, you won't want to be going anywhere with the red rain warnings. That will be affecting traffic movement. Our next news and weather is at 6.
Ngā mihi, Evie. The Minister in charge of workers' safety is being asked to better protect seasonal employees, allegedly being treated like slaves. Some RSE workers brought here from the Pacific Islands are being exploited, bonded to unreasonable debt and living in grotty conditions, according to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commissioner. The Green Party and the Council of Trade Unions also want the system overhauled. Well, today, Minister Michael Wood met with the Commissioner and he joins us now. Tēnā koe, Minister.
Good evening, Lisa.
So what is going to change as a result of what you heard in that meeting?
Well, I had a very good meeting with Commissioner Karanina Simeo this morning, in which she outlined to me her concerns and her observations, and what I described to her effectively 3 steps that we're taking. The first
Minister,
is that,
I'm really sorry to interrupt, but it's a slightly dodgy phone line and we really do want to hear what you've got to say. I'm wondering if you could just move a few paces and we'll give it another go. So three steps.
Let me give that a try for you, Lisa. I'm sitting in a car in Rotorua. I'll move around a little bit and see if we're any better off.
Appreciate your efforts, thank you. We'll stand very by. You tell us when you're good to go.
No problem.
Okay.
Are we sounding any better there?
We'll give it a go. So you had this meeting this morning and as a consequence, what's going to happen?
I had a very good meeting with Commissioner Karanina Simeo this morning, at which she described to me her concerns and her observations. And I spoke to her about 3 steps that we're taking. The first is that we're taking these concerns seriously. The Labour Inspectorate have commenced an investigation into the specific concerns that have been raised with the employer in question, and they will be fully undertaking that exercise and reporting back within 6 weeks. Secondly, and this is a process which started before these concerns came to light, I've commenced a process with employers and unions in the sector to sit down and to look at how we want the sector to evolve over the coming season, to look at the needs of the sector in terms of number of workers, but at the same time, look at how we make sure that these concerns are dealt with and we have good standards. Thirdly, in terms of the setting, the government has agreed to a full review of the RSC scheme, which will commence in early 2023, and making sure we have good labour standards across the board will be a key part of that.
So you just dropped out there, Minister. So at the beginning of 2023, you will do a full review of the RSE scheme.
That's right. The government has agreed to that process, and a key part of that will be making sure that the scheme is sustainable and that we do have good labour standards for all of the workers concerned. The RSE scheme is important to New Zealand, it's important for the workers concerned, it's important to Pacific Island states, but it must be sustainable and we must treat people fairly if it's to meet its objectives and if it's to retain social license.
Based on what you've heard from the Commissioner, do you accept, as she does, that some RSE workers are in essence being treated like modern-day slaves? Do you accept that?
We have to have a proper investigation into these matters. As the Commissioner said to me, she is one of our senior watchdogs in the system, so we take the concerns she has expressed seriously, but she doesn't have the powers of investigation. That's why we need to make sure that the Labour Inspectorate and other authorities now thoroughly investigate to determine whether those things are happening, and the Labour Inspectorate is doing that work as we speak.
But I suppose the issue with that, and the Commissioner has raised this herself, that MB and the Labour Inspectorate have looked at this issue before and said there's nothing wrong going on. So do you have faith that they can actually deliver?
Look, yes, I do. The Labour Inspectorate have a formal statutory role. They are independent. Their role is to uphold labour standards. There are up to 25 cases over the past couple of years where they have recommended against certain employers being accredited as RSE employers. So they do take these issues seriously, and they do provide that guidance to Immigration New Zealand where they think that an employer should not be employing workers, and I have confidence in them to do that if there have been breaches. At the same time, I'm going to be conducting a review in the relatively short term of the standards to make sure that they are as clear as possible for the benefit of employers and workers, but also so that statutory authorities like the Inspectorate have clarity about the obligations they can enforce.
Appreciate your time this evening, Minister. Thanks for persisting with the phone line there. That is Minister Michael Wood talking there about RSE workers, and an investigation is underway. 6 weeks to report back, he says. Only 1,000 visitor visas were issued in the 11 days after the border reopened. Relatives visiting family here and tourists are among the 18,000 people waiting on a visa. Migrants say there is no priority for split families and they can end up behind tourists in the queue for entry. Jill Bonnet reports.
The immigration website says half of all visitor visas got turned around in 5 days during the autumn, and when the border reopened on July the 31st, they were expecting timeframes to improve. But of 19,000 applications up until last Thursday, 11,000 were still being processed, 7,000 were waiting for passports, and only 1,000 approved. A New Zealand resident, whose South African parents applied to visit the moment the border opened, says migrant forums are full of people talking about the wait.
It's been an emotional roller coaster because we've been so excited for things to open. Now the uncertainty continues. We've been following up daily with INZ, who are now giving us processing times of 3 months over the phone.
She says not only families, but also the tourist industry is suffering from the delays. Her parents verified their passports the day after their application went in, but it took another 10 days for immigration to confirm it had happened. She says getting updates is hard because of long wait times for the immigration call centre.
I mean, you've got people who've held for 5 hours. That's just madness, especially if you're phoning from abroad. My dad phoned yesterday. He held on the phone for more than 2 hours. It cost him about $100, only for the call to drop.
He's not alone. This Wanaka migrant was calling from Canada.
The last time that I called them, I was on hold for 2 hours, called, got disconnected after 30 seconds, and then was pretty dejected.
She and her partner have been waiting there for his visa to come through, but she had to fly back without him last week. As a Canadian, he could fly in visa-free, but they've been told he has to apply for a partnership visitor visa.
It seems a bit crazy that somebody with personal ties to New Zealand is having to wait that long to be issued a visa, where some miscellaneous person who just on a whim decides to go on holiday can have it no issue.
National Party immigration spokesperson Erica Stanford says the whole process is frustrating for migrants, none of whom report getting through to the call centre in less than 2 hours. She says glitches in having to re-verify previously used passports are slowing down tourist applications, and reuniting families is the last cab off the rank.
Say much about us as a country when the very last people that we allowed in through our border were those families who haven't seen each other for 3 years, or nearly 3 years.
Figures show a similar number of visitor visa applications now compared to pre-COVID years. Immigration New Zealand says visas are being processed in the order they're received, and there are no plans to prioritise applications for those with family here.
And let's get to some of your feedback now. It seems like the issue of the dog ban in Dunedin CBD is incredibly polarising. This from Claire. She says, so true about dogs. They are our best friends. Dogs under control is fine in cities. We need to mature on these issues. Go Dunedin, reckons Claire. On the other hand, this one. Dog owners are so entitled. I'm a Dunedin resident, and it's a relief to be able to have parts of the city where we don't have to avoid dog poo and dog owners who can't control their animals. Many of the walks around the city are dog poo highways, and the DCC enforcement team is missing in action. The following, all in capital letters, no to a bylaw change. Do keep your feedback coming, 2101 on text, and tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Scott Morrison's refusing to resign from the Australian Parliament as the fallout into his secret ministerial appointments continues. The former Prime Minister has apologised to his colleagues in a statement after it was revealed he appointed himself to 5 ministries during the pandemic. But today he held a press conference and defended his actions.
With an understanding of the expectation of public responsibility singularly directed at the Prime Minister, I believed it was necessary to have authority, to have what were effectively emergency powers, to exercise in extreme situations that would be unforeseen, that would enable me to act in the national interest. And that is what I did in a crisis. You're standing on the shore after the fact. I was steering the ship in the middle of the tempest. So I appreciate that your perspective is different to mine, and I think that may explain some of the differences in our vantage point and understanding of these issues. No ministers were interfered with in the conduct of their ministerial responsibilities, other in this express case, which I've been very clear about, which I've also said had nothing to do with the pandemic. I mean, I accept that you may not accept my explanation, and I accept that there may be many out there who don't, but I've given that explanation, and that's why I'm here today.
One of Mr Morrison's colleagues has demanded he resign from Parliament, but former Liberal Prime Minister John Howard says people need to move on. The ABC's Claudia Long reports.
After days of dismay and outrage at Scott Morrison's secret ministerial power grabs, former Prime Minister John Howard says it's time to move on.
Scott Morrison has talked about this, he's contextualised it, and I think everybody, particularly the current Prime Minister, should get on with the present and the future.
And the Liberal Party elder doesn't think Scott Morrison should resign from Parliament for secretly appointing himself to 5 senior ministries, including Treasury and Home Affairs, without the knowledge of most of his colleagues.
There are reasons why he did it, and part of the Conservative tradition is to always understand the context in which things occur. It's not in the interest of the Liberal Party to have a by-election at the moment.
And while even the country's most senior intelligence operatives were kept in the dark, the current Liberal leader, Peter Dutton, also thinks Scott Morrison should stay put. But constitutional and political experts believe the former PM's ministerial moonlighting has trashed the unwritten rules about how a government is run.
People do need to understand that our system is based on conventions. Those conventions are premised on people exercising self-restraint, and some of the checks and balances are the collectivity of Cabinet.
Public policy expert Professor Anne Tiernan from Griffith University has been concerned by what she's described as Scott Morrison's disregard for traditions and conventions for some time.
This is the risk of winning the miracle election, isn't it? It gives leaders lots and lots of authority and lots of power, but, in a collective system, our system's not a presidential system. There do need to be checks and balances.
So is it time for some laws to set in stone the conventions about how a government runs?
It's actually really about the extent to which self-restraint and collective responsibility were those important conventions and traditions of our system were operating in the Morrison cabinet, and it seems that they weren't very well.
And that was the ABC's Claudia Long reporting. It is 5 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Tributes are pouring in for Te Arawa leader and long-time Māori education advocate Sir Tobby Curtis, who died this morning aged 83. A proud Ngāti Piki'o and Ngāti Rongomai leader, his whānau are remembering him as a towering intellectual, a gifted orator and a tireless advocate for te reo Māori. Jamie Tahana reports.
Born at Lake Roto'ehu in 1939, Nōpera Tamihana Curtis was the youngest of 15 children. His parents aspired for him to do well at school, but with that came the discouragement of te reo Māori.
My older brothers and sisters went through school speaking Māori. A number of them were unfortunately punished for speaking Māori at school. Because I was the last, and my parents made sure that I wasn't going to be punished. So they went out of their way to ensure I didn't speak Māori.
He planned to leave Hatopetera boarding school in 4th form, but his parents kept him there, selling a section of their land to fund it. For that, he said he was driven to achieve something, and he did. After training as a teacher, he returned to Hatopetera as principal, before going on to academia, becoming a Fulbright scholar, then Deputy Vice-Chancellor at AUT. He was also heavily involved in Māori broadcasting, helping form several iwi radio stations and Whakaata Māori, Māori TV, as well as being chair of Te Māngai Pāho. Whānau spokesperson Arapita Tahana recalls a man with a staggering intellect, sharp tongue, straight talk and quick wit.
I think it was the Ardmore Teachers College. He had been advocating to establish a marae there to no avail. However, one day as they were moving some buildings onto the property, he was the person who had to go along and tell them where to put a building, and he quite deliberately put it not where it was supposed to go, but where he wanted a wharenui to go. And lo and behold, within a few months, that became a wharenui.
Toby Curtis spent his life challenging the status quo, driven by a belief that te reo is the key to getting tamariki to achieve. He also spent 16 years as chair of Te Arawa Lakes Trust. Another educator, former Māori Party co-leader Te Ururoa Flavel, says Tā Toby was a man of immense mana.
Anybody will tell you, as soon as Tobby walks into the room, you know Te was in the house. He served his people to the highest level and will rank as very much one of our most significant leaders from home.
But he also regularly challenged Te Arawa to do more to help their own. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, acknowledged his contribution.
He was a huge advocate for his people and a huge believer in the power of the education system when we get it right.
Tā Toby Curtis was a man who dedicated his life to challenging the education system. Arapeta Tahana says his loss is not only to Ngāti Pakiao and Ngāti Rongomai, but all of Aotearoa.
His lifetime, starting out in a time where his language and reo was suppressed, his culture was suppressed, to now where a lot of his nephews, nieces, grandchildren are able to celebrate and practice being Māori every day. So to a large extent, I think he's achieved a lot more than perhaps he thought. I know he was still pushing hard.
Toby Curtis will be returned to his Rākaiao marae on Friday. Then he'll rest on the shores of Moana Rotiiti, guarded by Maunga Matawhaura. E te rangatira, moi mai, moi mai, moi mai rā.
And that was Jamie Tahana reporting there. Let's get to some of your feedback now. Lots of reckons on the All Blacks and the coach Andy Foster keeping his job. Jim from Papamoa's got in touch. Who needs Andy Foster, says Jim. Sounds like we've got nearly 5 million expert coaches ready to take over and save the day. Love your thinking there, Jim.
RNZ News at 6. Good evening. Kia ora tātou. Ko Evie Ashton tēnei. A woman who's lived in Nelson all her life says she's never seen the Maitai River so high as it is today. The river breached its banks this afternoon and a state of emergency has been declared in the city. People in at least 70 homes near the river have been told to evacuate. One of them is Nile Street resident Teresa O'Connor.
We live sort of 2 houses from the river, from the Maitai, and houses close to the river, I know at least 2 have water through them. And, it's been rising very quickly and it's a very fast-flowing river as well.
Teresa O'Connor says it's been a good lesson in powerlessness. Nelson has now joined Buller and Westland at the highest possible weather alert level, red, which is reserved for the most extreme storms. Significant flooding and slips are expected. Hamish Cardwell has more.
Niwa says Takaka in Golden Bay got more than a month's worth of rain in 15 hours today, and there's much more to come. Met Service says nearly 150 millimetres of rain has fallen in the Rye Valley since midday yesterday. However, the heaviest fall has been in the Tasman Ranges, causing water to pour down valleys and swell rivers in Nelson. And the deluge isn't over yet. Up to 400 millimetres is forecast to fall in the Nelson region and Buller and Westland in the next 30 hours. Significant rain is also expected for Marlborough and for the top half of the North Island.
In Buller, emergency response staff are recommending voluntary evacuation in some parts of the region as a precaution. People in 140 vulnerable households in Westport, Seddonville and Mokihinui have been asked to leave before the Buller River peaks tomorrow morning. Emergency Management Controller Al Lawn says staff are knocking on doors with strong recommendations for residents to evacuate. He says the Buller River isn't expected to spill over any stop banks. The Children's Minister launched a new strategy in Kaitaia today, giving iwi rather than oranga tamariki the choice about where uplifted children go. Kelvin Davis says the Te Ata Tū strategy puts Māori at the centre and oranga tamariki in a support role in their Te Hiku area. The same approach will soon be taken nationally.
We want to prevent children having to go into care in the first place, but if children do need to be uplifted and put into the care of another whānau, then iwi and the providers, they'll be the ones making those decisions.
Kelvin Davis acknowledges iwi services need better funding and resourcing to meet new demands. The Prime Minister says she hasn't spoken to Gaurav Sharma since announcing his suspension from caucus yesterday. The Hamilton West MP has been suspended from Labour's caucus for making repeated allegations of bullying by the party whip's office and parliamentary service. Jacinda Ardern says she tried to call and message him after yesterday's caucus meeting to communicate this outcome and is yet to speak to him.
We certainly have made every effort to make sure that there is support there and, of course, to ensure that we're available. But again, that needs to be done on the in keeping with what at this time the space that the member needs.
Gaurav Sharma will continue as MP for Hamilton West but won't take part in caucus decisions unless invited. The Workplace Relations and Safety Minister has confirmed that early next year the government will do a full review of the recognised seasonal employer scheme. Michael Wood told Checkpoint a key part of it will be making sure the scheme is sustainable and that there are good labour standards for all of the workers concerned. The Equal Employment Opportunities Commissioner has reported witnessing RSE scheme conditions she describes as modern-day slavery. One of two men serving life sentences for the gruesome 2006 murder of Stanley Waipodi has been declined parole. Ashley Arnott will stay behind bars for at least another 9 months when he'll next meet the parole board. Jimmy Ellingham watched his hearing at Whanganui Prison today.
Now aged in his mid-30s, Arnott told the board he was disconnected from reality when he and Andre Gilling killed Mr Waipodi in a probable homophobic attack. He says it came about through a mixture of aggression, drugs and alcohol, and he lives with shame and guilt for what he's done. Arnott proposed he would live on a North Island property, but the police hold concerns about it, and the parole board told him his release plan needs more work.
RNZ intends to defend any legal proceedings taken by Arise Church. A copy of an independent report on the church detailing claims of racism, sexual assaults and homophobia was leaked to RNZ. When Arise was approached for comment, it said the report was being put to staff for their feedback and threatened RNZ with legal action. Arise also says the report is subject to an Employment Relations Authority non-publication order, but the authority had previously confirmed to RNZ the order applied to the church only. Following publication by RNZ, the authority today rescinded the order, saying it no longer has any practical effect. In sport, New Zealand rugby boss Mark Robinson says he respects the views of some fans and pundits who won't agree with the decision to retain Ian Foster as All Blacks head coach, but he's asking for their trust. Despite 5 losses from 7 tests, Foster has kept his job until the end of next year's World Cup, with former Ireland coach Joe Schmidt given an expanded role in the team.
We have taken a really good hard look at the situation. We've listened to a number of different views very close to what is happening within the environment, and ultimately we've made the best decision and the right decision for the team going forward.
The All Blacks play Argentina in Christchurch next Saturday. The Black Caps are chasing history in the first of 3 ODIs against the West Indies and Barbados tomorrow morning. They're coming off a T20 series win over the Caribbean side, but have never won a 50-over series there. That's something batting coach Dean Brownlee is hoping they can change.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to win over here for a reason. They're a good team, and we're going to have to beat our best to hopefully get a series win for sure.
The junior football ferns won't advance from their group at the Under-20 World Cup in Costa Rica despite 2 superb goals in their final group match. Needing to win by at least 2 goals, they drew 2-2 with Colombia this morning. And Elon Musk has tweeted he intends to buy the embattled English football club Manchester United, but it's not clear yet how serious he is. That's the news.
The CBD is a mess. The Albert Street's been blocked for months. There is no urgency about finishing anything.
We're talking about developing, building, infrastructure, retail. What about the arts? What are you going to do for the arts?
Not as if I've got no culture. Yeah, I play in a band and
do you?
And I surf on the weekend, so not quite as boring as I sound.
What's your band called again?
The Hanging Stones.
Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
You're back on Checkpoint next with Lisa Owen. Right now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. Severe weather warnings and watches are in place for a prolonged period of heavy rain and strong winds affecting northern and western parts of the country. A red heavy rain warning is in force for Nelson, Buller and Westland. From Northland to Taranaki, also Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo, periods of rain with some heavy falls, severe gale northeasterlies in exposed parts of Northland. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, also Whanganui and Taihape, cloudy with patchy rain. Manawatu to Wellington, periods of rain. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller and Westland, rain with heavy falls, easing late tomorrow. Significant heavy rain about Nelson, Buller and Westland. Canterbury and Otago, mostly cloudy, periods of rain clearing tomorrow evening. Southland and Fiordland, partly cloudy today, rain tomorrow, easing to a few showers in the evening. And for Te Kohu, the Chatham Islands, cloudy periods, rain developing tomorrow afternoon. It's 8 minutes past 6. I'll have the latest news headlines at 6:30.
Kia ora rā, Evie. No mai, hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. US Republican politician Liz Cheney has conceded she has lost the Wyoming primary to run again for Congress. The daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney and a vocal critic of Donald Trump, Ms Cheney has held the seat since 2017. Ms Cheney says she could have won the votes again, but it would have meant cozying up to Trump.
2 years ago, I won this primary with 73% of the vote. I could easily have done the same again. The path was clear. But it would have required that I go along with President Trump's lie about the 2020 election. It would have required that I enable his ongoing efforts to unravel our democratic system and attack the foundations of our republic. That was a path I could not and would not take.
She was trounced by Trump-backed attorney Harriet Hageman. Ms Cheney voted for Donald Trump's impeachment last year and played a leading role on the committee investigating the January 6th Capitol riots. She's vowing to continue to fight Mr Trump's election lies, telling supporters now the real work begins.
We must be very clear-eyed about the threat we face and about what is required to defeat it. I have said since January 6th that I will do whatever it takes to ensure Donald Trump is never again anywhere near the Oval Office, and I mean it. This is a fight for all of us together. I'm a conservative Republican. I believe deeply in the principles and the ideals on which my party was founded. I love its history, and I love what our party has stood for, but I love my country more.
It's unclear what her next political moves will be, including whether she'll run for president in 2024. As she left the stage, Tom Petty's I Won't Back Down blasted out from the event's speakers. To Australia now, where the former Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison is facing fierce backlash over his decision to appoint himself to multiple ministries. Some of that pressure is also being directed at Governor-General David Hurley, with questions about what he knew and whether he could have done things differently. As to whether Mr Morrison will cave in to calls for him to quit the Parliament, so far he's resisting. The ABC's Angus Randall reports.
2 days on from the revelation that Scott Morrison held 5 secret ministries, it's still the number one talking point for MPs. Barnaby Joyce was Scott Morrison's Deputy Prime Minister in the final year of his government. He believes the former Prime Minister would have known whether his actions were illegal.
Mr Morrison has not broken any law. He's not done anything illegal. There would have been a wealth of legal advice, no doubt, from the Governor-General.
Barnaby Joyce's successor as Nationals leader, David Littleproud, hasn't weighed in on the legalities, but says Scott Morrison has some work to do to build trust with his colleagues.
I think it's not so much that he appointed himself to it, it's the fact that he didn't tell his colleagues. I think that's the disappointing part of it, and obviously he's now having to reconcile that with those individuals.
Both David Littleproud and Barnaby Joyce say Mr Morrison should see out his term as the member for Cook in southern Sydney. While Scott Morrison's allies are facing questions over whether he should quit, the government says it's too early to rule out the possibility of legal consequences. Home Affairs Minister Claire O'Neill cautions anyone who thinks they know the whole story.
Be careful of anyone who is out there at the moment asserting that no laws were broken, because we do not know the answer to that yet. As Home Affairs Minister, I exercise significant legal powers personally in my role. And again, we had a situation where there were 2 ministers for Home Affairs. So if a court orders me to make a decision by a particular date and there's 2 ministers for Home Affairs, who owns the legal responsibility for that, and how are those responsibilities dispense with. So this is very complicated, very difficult, and it is far from apparent that no one has broken a law here.
Professor A.J. Brown is from Griffith University and is a board member of Transparency Australia. He wants to know why so many people, including the Governor-General, went along with Scott Morrison's plan.
On one hand, the Governor-General is obliged under our system to follow the advice of the Prime Minister and the elected government of the day, but at the same time, the Governor-General has to have an awareness of the fundamental constitutional principles in the Constitution which bind everybody, which bind the Prime Minister, which bind the government, which bind the parliamentarians. And in this case, the fundamental principles of responsible government were really undermined.
Like most public policy experts, Professor Brown doubts there are any legal repercussions for the Governor-General, but he says David Hurley should have done more to ensure the government remained accountable to both the public and the Parliament.
The Governor-General would have been perfectly entitled to say to the Prime Minister, "Oh, well, thank you, Prime Minister. Yes, I'll accept your advice to swear you in as the Minister for Health, but I'd just like to check that the existing Minister for Health is actually aware of and understands how this will operate. Otherwise, responsible government can't work." So the Governor-General would have been perfectly entitled to do that.
There's a push from the Greens for Scott Morrison to be investigated by Parliament's Privileges Committee, but it's not clear what, if any, sanctions they could hand down. Independent Senator Jackie Lambie has been vocal about her frustrations with the system that allowed this to happen.
It comes down to public support and they've lost it. And unless he comes out strong, he shouldn't be waiting for whether it's a legal implication or not, and I doubt if it is because, this is how they set it up. We're not very good at doing laws in Parliament, if you haven't noticed. They seem to be falling apart these days. This is just the credibility in the eyes of Australians has gone when it comes to Scott Morrison.
And that was Australian Senator Jackie Lambie there. The arrival of a Chinese surveillance ship bristling with antennae and satellite dishes at a port in Sri Lanka has led to a delicate diplomatic situation. The welcoming nation now finds itself in the middle of a tussle between India and China. The BBC's Michael Bristow explains.
The ship, called the Yuanwang 5, has docked at the port of Hambantota. Officially, it's a simple resupply stopover, but India's concerned. China says the vessel is for scientific research, but others believe it can monitor satellites, rockets and ballistic missiles. India doesn't want what some are calling a spy ship on its doorstep and pressured Sri Lanka to delay the visit. China appears to have got its way and was keen to celebrate. Its officials were at the dockside to mark the arrival.
It manifests not only your courage, tenacity and invincibility.
Sri Lanka is in an awkward position, not wanting to upset either China or India, particularly at the moment when it's looking for financial help from both countries to get it through its current economic crisis. A Sri Lankan MP who welcomed the Yuanwang 5 used the opportunity to remind Beijing that his country could do with a favour in return.
We hope and request China, our long-standing friend, to assist us in restructuring our debts and secure an IMF bailout as soon as possible.
Sri Lanka finds itself in a difficult position, a small country in need, caught between two large regional rivals.
It is 16 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Let's get to some of your feedback now. A lot of it still coming in on Ian Foster retaining his job. Dennis in Christchurch says, I'm pleased for Foster as he's a man with feelings and the vitriol has been intense. Dennis has put a PS on his bit of feedback about the All Blacks. He says, as for the Dogs, no way. That is the call to lift the ban in Dunedin CBD regarding dogs. And Julian's got in touch about the whole situation with New Zealand Rugby. The whole communications around the All Blacks coach has been embarrassing for New Zealand Rugby, says Julian. Shame on CEO Mark Robinson and his PR team for their amateurish bungling of this issue. The mixed messaging has been shambolic, more woeful than the performance of the All Blacks on the pitch. This highlights that it's Mark Robinson who should resign and not Ian Foster. And this one in from Brian. He says, rugby is a recreation for boneheads. Thanks for all your feedback. There have been a series of threats against the FBI since agents searched former President Donald Trump's Florida home. The number of threats is growing with serious concerns of potential violence against all forms of law enforcement. CNN's Brian Todd has more.
The head of the FBI Agents Association tells CNN threats against federal law enforcement are real and imminent. Separately, a law enforcement source tells CNN there's an unprecedented number of threats the FBI is investigating against its personnel in the wake of the FBI's search of Donald Trump's home, Mar-a-Lago. Here's one, quote, "I sincerely believe that if you work for the FBI, then you deserve to die. My only goal is to kill more of them before I drop. I will not spend 1 second of my life in their custody." Threats on social media allegedly made by Adam Buys of Mercer, Pennsylvania, according to court documents in the days just after the Mar-a-Lago search. The Justice Department has unsealed charges against Buys, who's not yet entered a plea.
These people are just ingesting this hate all the time. Where did we come in our country where people are calling to hang, destroy, kill, make FBI employees die? I have never seen this before in my 22 years of federal law enforcement.
And in at least one case, a suspect did more than just call for violence. Law enforcement authorities say Ricky Schiffer tried to breach the FBI's Cincinnati field office with an AR-15 style rifle before being killed by law enforcement in a roadside standoff last week. A social media account bearing Schiffer's name posted about what they termed a call to arms following the Mar-a-Lago search. Also after Mar-a-Lago, a joint bulletin from the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security obtained by CNN warned of a threat to place a so-called dirty bomb in front of FBI headquarters. The bulletin cites calls for civil war, armed rebellion, says specific law enforcement agents and the judge who approved the Mar-a-Lago search warrant have been threatened with death. Analysts say far-right extremists, including white supremacists who have access to firearms and explosives, could target FBI agents in the field.
So now if you're an FBI agent, every single door knock you do, every single individual you go to interview, as it relates to the ongoing January 6th investigation, now you have to worry about, do they want you dead when you knock on that door?
But what can't be accounted for is what this does to the psyche of the average FBI employee, who is always on the lookout for threats. But this is an added burden to these men and women who are trying to defend the Constitution and our rights.
Campaigning for the Brazil presidency is officially underway as the incumbent Jair Bolsonaro, known as the Trump of the tropics, takes on the left-wing leader Lula da Silva. The BBC's Katie Watson reports.
Back on the road and back on the bike. It's Bolsonaro's favourite way of campaigning. Driving through Juiz de Fora, he paraded for his fans. This is a small city that has huge significance for Bolsonaro. It was here 4 years ago he was stabbed at a rally, a defining moment in the previous campaign and a moment he alluded to at today's event, saying he'd been born again.
Estamos dando a largada, onde tentaram nos parar.
It was here they tried to stop us in 2018. I thank the hand of God who saved me. He wanted me to be president. And Brazil is doing so well. It's a rich country, robbed by the left who was in power.
Chants of mito, or myth, his nickname among his devoted fans.
He is the mito. He is the best one for Brazil.
He is the best president for Brazil. He is honest. He is he's very popular. I can trust in Bolsonaro.
His rival Lula chose to kick off his campaign at a car factory, staying true to his political roots as a union leader and metal worker in Sao Paulo. He's got this woman's vote, without a doubt.
Lula defends the rights of the poorest, the most humble, and Bolsonaro supports the rich. If Bolsonaro wins, I'm scared.
It's a noisy start to the campaign and says a lot about what's to come. Two men on either end of the political spectrum, two men who conjure up both adoration and hatred among people here. And we'll see that play out in the coming weeks. Plenty of Bolsonaro's supporters are convinced anything less than a victory for their candidate will only mean one thing: a stolen election. There may not be any basis for these allegations, but in such a divided country, there are some people who will try anything to stamp out the opposition.
Renters in regional Australia are getting no relief despite a decline in the price of houses in country areas. New data shows regional house prices have fallen for the first time since the pandemic started, but rents are still rising. The ABC's John Daly has more.
Regional house prices are starting to head south, but renters on the streets of Toowoomba in Queensland are still doing it tough.
I think it's really hard at the moment to find housing in Toowoomba. So eventually we got one, but to be honest, it's really hard. Like, we applied nearly 20 houses.
Because they just put my rent up $30 a week. We're not getting paid anymore, so we're forking out more. It's just more out of my pocket every fortnight.
I just moved and the rent was going up by $75 a week at my previous place with no warning.
Was it easy to find another place, or?
No, it took about 2 months. We actually had to extend the lease by 3 months. And yeah, it was a whole ordeal.
Like other regional centres, Toowoomba's housing market has been in a frenzy since the pandemic began, leaving a very low rental vacancy of 0.4%. Toowoomba councillor Megan O'Hara-Sullivan says that's having consequences.
When you hear about families living in cars, but more particularly that the greatest rate of homelessness is for women over 55, that's scary.
Those in favour? It's carried.
Toowoomba's council is trying to cut red tape and reduce fees and charges for subdivisions and medium-density housing to try and bring on new housing supply.
We need to look at the impact of people not being able to come to the region because they can't find a house, or the doctor who wants to come here and work as a specialist, or the teachers or the nurses. And if they can't find housing, then that impacts on our economy. So it's just a domino effect all the way through our community.
CoreLogic's latest quarterly regional market report shows the first fall of almost 1% in regional housing values since the pandemic began. So-called lifestyle areas, such as the Richmond Tweed and Illawarra regions in New South Wales and Queensland's Gold and Sunshine Coasts, saw the biggest drops. Eliza Owen is CoreLogic's head of research.
The fact that high-end regional markets are starting to move into a downswing is a bit of a canary in the coal mine for the rest of the market.
That's not necessarily good news for renters.
We've continued to see increases of around 1% in the regional rent values through July, and not much of a easing in that growth rate happening either. Property values and rents historically have moved together, so this is a really unique situation that we're in, and it's, I think, largely due to some of the unique demographic changes and constraints in the building industry that we've seen through the COVID period.
And Eliza Owen says with interest rates still rising and construction constrained, there's not much relief for renters in sight.
The Tasmanian tiger hasn't been seen in almost a century, but an Australian scientist is aiming to create a baby Tassie tiger in 10 years. Researchers believe they have the technology and hope a new partnership with a US-based biosciences firm will help to bring the tiger back to life. The ABC's Alexandra Humphreys has the details.
The Thylacine, or the tiger as you call him, has been creating quite a lot of interest lately.
By the 1960s, thylacines were already long gone from Tasmania. But intrigue about the creature lingered, so much so that the state government made a short film about them.
Not a lot is known about him because when the thylacine was plentiful, settlers were generally interested in furthering their sheep growing. And as a killer, his extermination was of the utmost importance.
Once the largest carnivorous marsupial, the Tasmanian tiger was an apex predator that looked a bit like a dog. University of Melbourne Professor Andrew Pask is dedicated to bringing them back, and he says a new partnership with a US firm might be the breakthrough his team needs.
We're at a point in time now where we've got the technology at our fingertips to really do this. There's no technologies that we need to bring an animal back from extinction now that we don't already have in hand.
The researchers have relied on the hundreds of thylacine specimens kept in museums to piece together its genome from DNA.
The way that de-extinction science works is you have to look around in nature to find the closest living relative. In the case of the Tasmanian tiger, that's the fat-tailed dunnart. It's a small little carnivorous marsupial species about the size of a mouse.
They've also mapped the fat-tailed dunnart's genome. Now the scientists are making slight changes to dunnart cells to turn them into thylacine cells. Then a process like IVF will likely see a dunnart act as a surrogate for a thylacine joey.
Dunnarts and thylacines, although they're vastly different in size as an adult, they all give birth to babies that are not much bigger than the size of a grain of rice. So what that means is the challenges of growing that embryo either in the lab setting or in a surrogate mum is much less challenging for a marsupial than it is for something like a mammoth.
Professor Pask is hoping the first joey could be born within a decade.
The ultimate success of this project for us is not just being able to bring back the thylacine, but being able to put it back into that environment, being able to put it back into Tasmania. And that's because it was the only marsupial species that was an apex predator. And they play really critical roles in balancing the entire ecosystem that sit beneath them in those food chains.
The US biosciences firm Colossal is already working to bring back the woolly mammoth. Its chief executive Ben Lamb says the projects are about more than resurrecting lost species.
We think that's a technology that can be massively transformative, not just, in bringing back thylacines and mammoths, but could be really helpful in conservation aspects around the world.
Professor Pask says it's about righting a wrong of the past.
I think we owe it to some of the species that we aggressively exterminated to bring those animals back if we can.
Interesting concept. Some of your final thoughts before we head off on RSE workers and allegations that some of them are being treated like slaves. On Twitter, one listener says, can the government do the RSE review before next year so changes are in place before the next season of summer fruit picking? Do a review next year and it's too late. Jackie's got in touch about the petrol station owners who featured earlier in the program. They've been, I think, ram-raided twice and burgled a couple of times too. Jackie says those poor petrol station owners who appeared on your program and the poor people in the surrounding community, they deserve immediate recognition and financial support for what they are enduring. That little garage is a lifeline for the community, says Jackie. And so much feedback on whether dogs should be allowed into Dunedin CBD, currently bylaws stopping them from going into certain areas. This listener says, can't we have at least some places that are dog-free? Not everybody likes dogs. Lots of people are scared of them, and many dog owners have shown zero responsibility. This listener says, dog owners are a bunch of irresponsible idiots. The number of times we get dogs running up and jumping on us is absolutely ridiculous. Bruce reckons he's been attacked a couple of times, bitten, dealt with dog poo on his shoe, and then he gets told, he or she doesn't normally do that. Thank you for getting in touch with all your feedback. That's about all we've got time for. The Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. Check out Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcast back if you want to listen back to anything. And ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First Up asks Grant Robertson about Gaurav Sharma and if he backs Ian Foster. Couple of hot potatoes there. Do tune in, 5 a.m. First Up.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Kia ora tātou, I'm Evie Ashton. Nelson will evacuate more than 200 homes this evening as floodwaters ravage the city centre, while in Westport, Bulla Hospital grounds are starting to flood. The Children's Minister launched a new strategy in Kaitaia today, giving iwi rather than oranga tamariki the choice about where uplifted children go. And the Australian Prime Minister says his predecessor owes his country an apology over his secret grab for extra ministerial power. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather is at 7.
On Our Changing World this week, we speak to a team of researchers investigating virus diversity and evolution.
It's mind-blowing how many viruses we still have to discover. Around 99.99% of the virusphere is still to be discovered.
Follow Our Changing World on Apple Podcasts, Spotify or iHeart. Or join me, Claire Kincannon, Thursdays and nights, just after the 9 o'clock news, here on RNZ National.
Thank you very much, Claire. Karen Hay in for Brian Crump, and I can assure you that nothing untoward has happened to him, but he is away for another night. The detail for you now.